and we'll get started here momentarily. The first thing I think I'm going to ask you all to do, those of you who wrote responses to questions at the end of the chapter 7, we'll start with those, and we'll see what people have come up with, and or anything that people would like to volunteer just on the spot if something occurs to you. So we'll do that, and then we'll talk about some of those videos on experiments that I posted. See if we have any comments on that, and then we will begin with talking about questionnaires and surveys and how to write good questions and that kind of thing. So, but we will get started here in just a jiffy. Well, hello, folks. Hi. Okay, well, I've got 4 after now, so we will need to go ahead and get started. Like I said just a moment ago, I would like to hear from some of you regarding the questions at the end of chapter 7. The first one, this asks us to go back and remember what multi-stage clustering sampling is. And it asks, what are the steps involved in selecting a multi-stage cluster sample of students taking first-year English in U.S. colleges and universities? So students taking English in U.S. colleges and universities. First year English. So whatever that would be at Mary, what was it, 113 or something? Yeah. So that's the first one. So I guess let's just sit and think about that for a moment. I don't know how many of you answered that one, but what would be the first, because ultimately we want to get to students, but we have this huge universe of possible samples to pick from because we want students from U.S. colleges and universities. And so what would be the first stage? What would be like the first cluster that we would want to go with? Who has a kind of a sequence of how this would probably go? Yeah, Rebecca, then Mike. Yeah.
Do you want me to just say the first step, right?
Sure. Yeah. What would you be the first cluster? What would that be?
I said a list of multiple colleges and universities in the United States.
Okay, so yeah, a comprehensive listing of colleges and universities within the United States, that would be a good first step. Yeah, you'd want to have that as the basis from which you could then form clusters if you would want. Mike, what would you do in addition to that if you want to?
Well, I put like from once you decide like what schools and universities you want, you then need to find out, I guess you would get a list of just the first year students, and then from there you could subset that into who is in English, like first year English. But like your initial thing, once you get to colleges and universities, you need to obviously just pick out the first year students as opposed to all the other students.
Yeah, okay, so a couple things. You've got the level of universities and colleges. You could have a cluster of them from which you randomly select based on the region. So you could have, the East Coast, West Coast, and then Mid-Atlantic, all these different colleges, these different regions. So you have a random selection from those, and then from within those colleges, you would have a random selection of classes. And then from within those classes, you have a random selection of students. And so you would have, I don't know what it is, 3 or 4 stages there. You would have a random selection process going on that would hopefully help you be better at making inferences about the larger population that you're ultimately interested in. That is how students in first year English classes in colleges and universities are faring overall. So any other comments on that about how you would want to do that in stages and have clusters? So you have, you start this biggest stage, like a comprehensive listing of colleges and universities, but ultimately you want to get down to the individual flesh and blood student level. And so every step along the way, you want to have like a stage in mind from which you'd have clusters that you randomly select. And then from that, you could say that you'd have a better sample to make inferences about English students at U.S. universities. So yeah, any other comments about that? Oh yeah, Jared? Yeah.
Would you have to look at like demographics in a case like this of the schools or like student bodies?
Yeah, that's another thing that you'd probably want to do your cluster analysis or stratification on, and then do a cluster of that based on, income, maybe, demographic makeup of the universities themselves. So you're getting it's representational with the United States demographically. So that would be a good thing to consider when you're trying to make an inferential statement from the sample, right? So, the other thing which would help with that would making sure to do a sampling of historically Black colleges and universities. So you do that as well as to make sure that you get a good sampling of African American college students, for example. But there's also colleges that are predominantly female and some male too. Anything else about that, kind of trying to get a better read of how, in this case, English students are doing at colleges by going through a cluster stage sampling kind of process to hopefully make your sample more inferential. That is, make it really say something about the population that you're interested in, because that's at the end of the day, that's what this is all about, folks, is taking samples so that they actually are speaking to what's really going on in the population. Okay, well, anyway, we had another question on there that asked about surveys, and this is something that we'll talk about here later on. Surveys conducted on the internet. And based on what you know about sampling, can you anticipate problems concerning sampling frames, representativeness, and the like when you're doing sampling, where your sample is based on the internet, people that you get on the internet? And do you see any solutions to this? It says problems, because a lot of surveys anymore are based on samples of people from the internet, and so I don't know how this messes with inferential power. If you have a really big sample, does it or not? Yeah, Emily, what do you think?
One of the problems I mentioned, I just said how, obviously most people have internet, but there's still a small portion of people that don't have access to internet daily.
Oh yeah,
that would leave them out of any samples for internet surveys.
Yeah, that's a good point to point out that you, especially in rural communities, lower income communities, and you're seeing this now with trying to sign up for the corona vaccine, people that don't have internet access are having a real hard time just getting opportunity to sign up for the thing. And so, yeah, if you're doing sampling and it is a requirement that you would have a functional internet connection, then yeah, that could lead to a selection bias in who you're getting in your sample, and then therefore limiting the inferential power of what the sample can say about the population. Right, good. what else? What are the problems with using internet, kind of using that as the way to collect data from people? Yeah, Tyler?
One of the things I said was if the topic is like made aware to the people, or if it's just like put out there and like asking for volunteers, the people who are more likely to respond are probably those who feel more strongly about it, whether or not they agree or disagree.
Yeah, that is when you're trying to get people based on their preferences for certain products on the internet or whatever, you will be selecting for a certain type of person, as opposed to randomly selecting from a group of people who are different in lots of ways, but not necessarily all the same in one way for sure, that they're all interested in X, and that's why you got them from this particular website. Yeah, because that's another type of selection bias that would be more likely to be enter into an internet-based survey than one that has a truly large random sample of people from some population that aren't all alike in one way that may be problematic for your study. Good. Well, what else? Problems with the internet, getting data from people on the internet. I mean, beyond ethical issues related to it, just problems with making inferences from what you found on the internet, from your internet-based sample to the large population. Yeah, Rebecca, what do you think?
I said that like if you have a certain thing that you're looking for, like you only want college students to answer, it's kind of hard to control that over the internet, and people can just lie and say they're college students, and I feel like that messes with the data.
Yeah, there is a lot of quality control involved in face-to-face interviews. We'll talk about that a little bit later too, because yeah, you don't know if who you're talking to is who they say they are. People can masquerade as other people on the internet. That's pretty easy to do. So yeah, that's another problem with that. The anonymity allows for all kinds of false reads or inaccurate data collection. Good. What else, folks? Anything else about this problems related to your sample being based on people that you rounded up from the internet, from wherever they may be coming from? Some good answers were provided there with selection and the problems that kind of come from that, self-selection problems. Okay, well, let's move on then. Let's take a look at, there were these were not long, right? These were videos that I would like for you to have watched before this class. We didn't meet on Thursday last week, but if you haven't watched them, it's okay. Just watch them at least sometime here soon. These are videos that highlight experiments, social science-y type experiments, best as experimental as social scientists can get, in several different areas. The first one was on hotspots and crime, about how you can try to reduce crime through targeted type policing. And there was one on Facebook and happiness, about Facebook users and how it affects happiness. And then another one was on self-control, and this, what is now kind of this legendary experimental paradigm using a marshmallow to test to see how long kids resist to eating the marshmallow, and see if that has any predictive validity on their ability to resist temptation much later on in life and to be successful and all these other things. And so, yeah, I didn't know if people wanted to weigh in on any of these, on the experiments themselves, if you have any comments about them or questions about them, because I'd prefer that you sort of do a little bit explanation than me, for whoever would like to talk about any one of these here for just a moment. So yeah, anybody have any thoughts about the methods involved in this stuff, and the conclusions that they're drawing from any one of these, the crime and hotspots, or the happiness and Facebook and the marshmallow test and self-control. What that says, if you buy it or not. First of all, I mean, sometimes things turn out to be wrong. We're only really understand that through further science, through further experimentation. We can't just give up. But yeah, this is these are good examples of the kind of things that you might see in the social sciences as experiments. The one with the hotspots in crime, that talks about you have places where crime is much more likely in a given few city blocks than in the entirety of the rest of the city. In fact, they are on there saying that most city blocks there's like no crime most all the time, but it's only really concentrated in a few city blocks. And so if you have officers strategically patrolling more often in a few areas, and actually you can just remove them from these other areas, you can be successful measurably in reducing crime in these crime hotspots. And it's not that it just moves around the block, that crime is not just displaced, it actually is reduced through more strategic deployment of officers in certain areas. And just it's not as if they're out there tackling dudes, just having a visible presence of a police officer in these crime hotspots areas has been found to reduce crime. And so there is this real lopsided distribution when it comes to crime and its occurrence. People, a very small fraction of people commit most of the crimes, and most of the crimes occur in a very small fraction of the neighborhoods and blocks in any major city. And so this crime in hotspots, this experimentation with removing police from some area and building them up more in other areas has shown to have a real overall net improvement in the crime rate. That is, the crime rate drops when they deploy this. So that's and they're comparing it to other areas that have similar crime rates, but they don't have the same sort of increase in policing. And so it's kind of a natural experiment in policing. There was the one on happiness and Facebook, and the concern that it's been long found that Facebook and happiness tend to be negatively correlated, as people who spend more time on Facebook tend to be less happy. But it's not clear if it's Facebook that's causing the displeasure or it's people that are displeased are more likely to go on Facebook. But the experiment, they looked at this one company that divided their employees into people who were strictly forbidden to look at Facebook. I guess at least at work, they couldn't do it at all, and other people that were encouraged to. And they monitored their self-reported happiness. And it's the people who did more social comparisons that were on Facebook, looking at other people's selfies and things like that, doing that excessively on Facebook, were the ones that became less happy over time. And so there's something about too much social comparison that has been confirmed in this experiment, that it's not a matter of just people who are unhappy self-selecting and looking at Facebook more often. It's not Facebook just period. It's people that are doing a lot of kind of comparing themselves to other people by looking at their pictures and things like that on Facebook that are showing them to be less happy over time compared to the control group. And then there's this marshmallow test thing that was looking at how over time kids who were able to resist eating a marshmallow when presented to them when they were very young, they measured how long these kids were able to keep from from biting and eating the marshmallow. Some kids went the whole time, and other kids gobbled the thing down within 5 seconds. Well, they found out that after like 12 years later, the kids who did not eat the marshmallow, they got the reward of getting a second marshmallow like 2 minutes later or something like that. They resisted temptation to eat the first. They found out these kids later were doing much better educationally, economically, all kinds of measures that you'd be really surprised to be predicted by whether or not they could resist eating a marshmallow. And so that is a testament to the real validity in existence of this thing called self-control that a lot of sociologists and criminologists are interested in. It's this idea that within us, there is this ability to resist temptation, and so goes the theory that temptation and inability to resist impulsive type behavior is what causes criminal behavior. And so this marshmallow test is something that is confirmed by long-term follow-ups after recorded data from looking at kids just with a marshmallow sitting in front of them. Just a lot, it's funny videos to watch, but kids just kind of just like losing it, like, I need to eat the marshmallow. But some kids do very well at not eating the marshmallow. And many years later, the follow-up to these kids finds that the marshmallow resistors, the high self-control kids, are the ones that are more likely to be successful, have their act together, all these things. And so that's another type of experiment showing predictive validity, showing that if something is really supposed to be responsible for all these other, what we'd say, conventional or pro-social behaviors, then it should be predictive based on, or be able to be predicted based on prior observations. In this case, yeah, it does meet that criteria. Okay. So any comments on any of that you maybe take issue with? You don't buy it. I think resisting the marshmallow predicts just better overall success many years later. That seems to be the case. So yeah. All right. Well, anyway, those were some what I thought somewhat interesting findings from social sciencey type experiments. And so let's go ahead now and take a look. Is this the right one? Okay. Can you see my screen? It should be a PowerPoint screen. Can people see that? Okay. All right. Having problems the other day. Okay, so on my screen it says questionnaires and it says closed ended questions. Can I get a thumbs up from people to see if they can see that? Okay, great. Yeah, so good. This next set of slideshows, and well, next set of slides and next chapter in your book deals with surveys and questionnaires and questions that you would see in lots of, you could see them in an experiment. They could come up there. They could come up in just a survey that you get. They could be in a face-to-face type interview. But there is a lot of thinking that has gone into how to do this in the right way and to avoid doing it in the wrong way or making some mistakes. And so what I'd like to do here is just to go through some of what I think are some of the major points in that chapter 9 in your book, and some of the major things to avoid, I suppose, when we're doing questionnaires and the major methods of delivery. So closed-ended questions are really quite common in lots of surveys and questionnaires, as you probably well know. If you've ever taken one, you've encountered some type of closed-ended question where there's a question and then there is a predetermined set of responses that you are to choose from. and usually there's some number associated with them. And there is usually there's some type of logic to how this is being measured, as we talked before. There are these nominal type measures, and there's ordinal, and there's interval, and there's ratio type measures. Here we have a question that is actually taken from a survey that I worked on and collected data for, that asked young people a series of questions that how often the past 12 months have they experienced these things, and there's a bunch of questions like not felt so good the next day because of your drinking and drug use, and got into an argument with a friend or family member because of your drinking and drug use. And so there's a whole series of things, these questions, these type of questions, they all ended with because of your drinking or drug use. And each of them had the same response set. So it went from 1, never, all the way to almost daily. So this is an ordinal type scale, because there's not much precision here, but we just know that one number indicates more problems associated with drinking and or drug use than a lower number. And so this is a very common type of closed-ended question. A couple things that we want to make sure and do is that we want to have exhaustive questions or responses. Responses should be exhaustive and mutually exclusive, and you should have them so that they're not overlapping with one another, and that they cover the full range of what you would expect someone could say within reason. So you don't want to get too simple, but then again, you don't want to give too much detail or provide people with too many responses that you're not really getting any more accurate of a response. And so you could argue that an 8-point scale may be just right for this, going from never to 8 almost daily. You might say that, well, 8 is not good enough. You need a 9, 10, 11, and 12 in there to separate out people who are really having serious substance abuse problems, because there's more variation up there at the far end of the tail that you're not really doing a good job counting for, because you ended at 8 and you need to break up the almost daily, or something like that. You can always criticize these things, but this, I think, does meet the criteria of being exhaustive and mutually exclusive. Okay, so good thing about these type of closed-ended questions, and one of the main reasons they're used a lot, is because statistical analyses are really quite straightforward with this pre-structured coded response set. And so you already have an idea in mind of how one would make sense of this statistically, because you've coded it in a way that follows some sort of logic. But there are probably some limitations to asking closed-ended questions like this. Can anybody think of any that you might see looking at this, asking about drinking and drug use and the frequency of something like that occurring, beyond what I already said about it? Any problem with this kind of, if someone would have to respond using this response set? Any problems people might I see doing it like this? Yeah, I mean, in addition to maybe the almost daily being problematic, it could be the 12-month period may be too long of a frame for people to be responding to. Other surveys that ask about substance use type items usually do like 30 days, past 30 days, how often. So, there's that kind of stuff that you have to keep in mind, because you're dealing with actual people and 12 months, people can say, read that and like, okay, but how accurate is the recall for 12 months? 30 days, maybe better. So there's that, and just the imprecision that you get in some of the levels of the responses could not be adequate, might not be adequate to really capture the full variation, the full range of substance abuse or related type behaviors, experiences there. Okay, so there are also the open-ended type questions that you can get in surveys. One of these, another survey that I worked on asked this towards the end of an otherwise very closed-ended survey. One of them, it asked, one of the questions asked was, what makes a person an adult? And so the participants, they're all like high school kids, they all could type in and say what makes a person an adult. And some of them were verbose and wrote a lot, others wrote very little. But there was a lot of variability that was captured in their responses. Things ranging from moving out of parents' home to turning 18 makes a person an adult, to graduating from high school, to getting a job, to getting married, to paying taxes, to getting pregnant, to having sex. And so you, I mean, you get a sense of what a person's background might be like, depending on what kind of response they give to this sort of a question. Imagine, the differences in the person that might say, well, graduating from high school or getting a job makes me an adult, as opposed to someone says getting pregnant or having sex makes me an adult. To me, that suggests a different type of person that has a different type of background than someone who says something much more, I don't know, conventional and or pretty well conformist. So you have these types of open-ended questions that are interested. The difficulty, though, you ultimately, the people usually want to do with this kind of stuff is that they want to nevertheless code these into distinct type of statistical categories of how many of them said things like this, said things about turning 18, or said something that was more personal, like getting married and making one an adult. So that kind of goes along with the territory of having open-ended questions. There is the pain then of how one would want to account for any sort of quantitative sense, whenever you're using not just numbers, but the words more, less, anything like that suggests some numerical value. And so you have to start answering these kind of questions ultimately, or in the end, even though you may have a kind of more of a qualitative type data source, like an open-ended question. Okay, so some of these things that people should avoid when they are asking survey questions, no matter what the format is one of them, is avoid double-barreled questions. Okay, and so an example of a double-barreled question would be, your mom and dad show you affection. Like type item ranging, 1 strongly disagree to 5 strongly agree. Anybody want to shout out maybe why that's considered a double-barrel question, or just a problematic question?
One might show you affection and the other doesn't, so the answer might not be same for both.
Yeah, there's a problem. There's a problem with using and in the question because one may feel very different about mom versus dad. So that is confusing and may lead to really invalid type responses. Now, in some cases, it's very concordant. Mom and dad are both loved and known very well to the child that you're asking, but in other cases, not, right? So that is a problem. So you want to avoid those kind of double-barreled questions that may be getting at 2 different things. Competency to answer the question. It's not just that the person is dumb or something like that. It's like if I asked you, how many hours have you driven in the past year? What are you going to say? well, what in the world? I mean, you would just be guessing wildly at number that you're going to get a calculator out and start, calculate that. No, you're probably not. And if I even gave you the answers of, you could write out or type in an answer or some preset response, it would probably be a problem with you having that knowledge at hand. And so that would be a problem with competency. In your lifetime, how many sexual partners have you had? So that is another one where people may not exactly know, what would be best here, to write in a number, have them just say a number or give a pre-structured response set. I can tell you that in the ad health data set, that there are these questions, types of how many sexual partners have you had questions in multiple ways of the data. So they ask them multiple times, and so you can measure about what is the rate at which people acquire sexual partners over time. And when you just allow people to write in a response, people will write in sometimes very, very high responses for how many sexual partners they've had, just well outside the range of what you might think possible. And so one wonders, is that a valid response? Should you code that as something less than? Should you convert that sort of logarithmic scale, and so it doesn't outweigh the other scores in the scale? But there is some drawbacks to allowing people lots of freedom to provide answers to something that they may really have a lot to say about. They may have, may have really a lot of partners, but they really don't know how many, and they're just guessing. Same thing if I asked you how many hours in the past year have you driven, you're probably just going to guess. So there's a competency issue that goes on, and there's also of course, the language itself must be written usually at a 6th grade reading level, even if you're giving it to people who are 18 years of age or older. You want to make sure that questions are just, the language in them is very simple. So nothing beyond what you would expect a 6th grader, the length, at least the vocabulary, you wouldn't expect them anything for the 6th grader to have to master that. Okay, avoiding negatively worded items. So this comes in lots of different forms, but take this one for example. How often in the past week did you not talk to your mother about school-related issues? Well, what is the problem with that? How often in the past week did you not talk to your mother about school-related issues? Anybody volunteer? What, Tyler? Yeah, what do you?
It would probably just be easier just to ask how many times have you talked to them about school-related issues?
Yeah, this is just, this almost makes the question nonsensical, because it's how many times have you not done something? I mean, that is, who knows? I mean, out of all the possibilities, every second you could be not doing that, but you're not, so it is something where you don't, this is an obvious, silly example, but there's other cases where it's not so obvious that what you're doing is not writing a great question because there's some negatively worded item in there. Likewise, the questions about how sensitive should you be in asking the number of times that something has happened. Well, those previous examples I gave you were kind of silly examples, but at other times, maybe even with the sexual partners one, it's not so obvious what is the right way to ask a question to get valid responses. So items that might be biased in some way by what the language of the question. So take these, for example, drug testing at the workplace is acceptable to ensure safety of coworkers, or drug testing at the workplace is acceptable to guard against employee theft. And so how are these items biased? Can anybody see where the bias might come in? What is the problem with how these questions are being asked, and if they could be asked in a better way?
I mean, I guess people who like would use drugs like at the workplace, they're obviously gonna, like, you can guess what their answers are gonna be. They're obviously gonna be for, or I'm sorry, they're obviously gonna be against drug testing at the workplace.
Yeah, I mean, there's the issue of people that do use drugs are probably going to be against it because they use drugs. There's also going to be an issue of people who are just against drug testing at the workplace, period, and it's not acceptable under any circumstances. And for that reason, you're going to get people who will say no on all of this stuff because they think it's not acceptable under any circumstances, and so you're not going to get it. It doesn't really matter that you have variation among those people, whatever variation you do have. What else? Any other problems with these kind of type of questions where it's so what I'm saying, what I'm saying is drug testing at the workplace is acceptable to ensure. So you might find it unacceptable for any reason. And so it's to put that additional condition on there makes it so it's, again, kind of biased or double barreled in a sense. Any other comments on this? Yeah, so this is just some of these things that we want to avoid doing. And again, sometimes the examples are kind of obvious where you don't want to do that, but where it gets tricky are the places where we're not so sensitive, and we think that we got a really great question, and really it's double barreled, or it maybe have kind of awkward language where it's negatively worded, or it's got an and in there. It's all these things can make things more difficult for people to give you a straightforward, honest answer. So that's what we want to get out of people when we do these surveys. There are also formatting issues when you give out surveys. You want to soften people up. You want to not go right for highly sensitive items right away. And so when working on a survey that eventually asked kids about issues that could get them in trouble with the law and dealt with who they were having sex with and that kind of stuff. The format that we use started off not with those kind of questions right away, but stuff like this, like time spent doing homework, how important are your friends to you? Okay, a whole bunch of questions that were kind of like that around those same themes. I can go to my parents when I have concerns or questions about the opposite sex. I do not have much to be proud of. So you start getting more and more kind of sensitive, personal type questions. I would have to be committed to a guy or girl to have sex with them. Have you ever had sexual intercourse? And so not until well into the survey would you ever ask about something like sexual intercourse. Like you would not want to put that question number 3. Have you ever had sexual intercourse to a 15, 16-year-old kid? That's not going to go over well. I mean, they may snicker, they may answer, they may just, who knows, but it's just generally thought that you shouldn't go right for the most sensitive type topics right off the bat. And then eventually stuff that is very high risk, like sharing a needle or syringe with another person. That gets way further into the survey with the high risk type questions. And so, there is these formatting issues. Ordering of questions is one that's important. Avoid asking excessive or unnecessary questions. You want to ask as much as you can if you have somebody who's sort of captive audience or just putting up with you and completing your survey. But you got to be careful not to wear them out with too many questions, that especially questions that are irrelevant to them. And so you want to have contingencies in there, like you don't want to ask, obviously, young men about pregnancy experiences, but nor would you want to continue to ask somebody questions about heroin use and management of addiction if they said they've never used heroin. So there's questions that you'd want to have asked only of people after they've said yes to another question on your survey. That kind of thing is a lot easier to do, obviously, if you're doing it on a computer or if it's an internet assisted type survey, where you can do it on paper, of course. You have to make sure and read in the fine print. If no to this, then skip to, and then you have to go down to the survey and skip to the part. And we've all seen that on some survey or some sort of questionnaire we have to fill out. But contingencies are good so that you don't have people getting fatigued and filling out extraneous information that really is not relevant to them at all. And so we want to make sure and keep the participants sort of happy, but just kind of filling out the survey, going along, and not being bothered by questions that may not apply to them at all, and they might be wondering what's going on with the survey and may just stop. Okay, so want to go over here just some of the first, some of the most traditional ways of collecting survey type data. There is the self-administered mail-in type survey, where you're just sending out. Companies still do this sometimes, send out surveys about their products and their services, and there might be some incentive to respond. But we know that women generally are more likely to turn these things back in than men, based on the names of who's responding to these surveys. And so this return process, if you're going to go this route, is made a lot easier if you have some sort of prepaid business envelope to give to your survey participants, so they're not including the postage themselves. And you can have follow-up mailers that go out that promise some sort of payment or incentive for what enter yourself into a lottery or something like that, that can go out. And when you're doing this, you want to measure, or at least take careful note of, your response rate. So how many you get back over how many you originally sent out. So if you have a response rate that's really well below 50%, what is the problem with that, with a survey that's getting a response rate well below 50%? Why is that a concern? Even if you have, you still got like 1,000 surveys back, if you got your response rate lower than 50%, well, why would that be concerning?
Well, like we mentioned earlier, it wouldn't be representative of what you're trying to sample.
Right.
Also, the people that have more stake in it would be more likely to answer if you have a lower percentage of participation.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, right. It's just this problem of self-selection, of selective measurement of the population, because you're not getting many people relatively return your survey back to you. So you got to wonder, is there something special or something odd or something non-representative about the people who are returning my survey? And so, yeah, 50% would be really high at this point. No one's going to get that high, but that's why, there's all kinds of ways around that with large sample sizes. Okay, well, there are still traditional telephone surveys, and they're still going, even with more and more people having cell phones. This is still happening. Some of the advantages with surveys done through telephone, they can cover more respondents than what traditional interviews could. They are safer than doing traditional interviews. Appearance from doing a face-to-face interview is obviously going to be less of an issue with the telephone survey, but the response rates are going to be below. Cell phones and answering machines and caller IDs and all the stuff that is now a staple in most people's homes has caused the telephone survey, based usually on landlines, to be less of a reliable way of collecting data. more and more so, as you well know, you have computer assisted surveys that are going on through the internet. Well, you could have, first of all, you could have laptops being given out to people rather than paper surveys. I did this when I collected data for a couple surveys, is that we had laptops for kids to fill out questionnaires. The questions were on there, and then the data was automatically coded into some spreadsheet program on the computer, so you wouldn't have to turn around and then punch it into some spreadsheet. So this is really good because there's much less room for human error. Whenever you have to use a human to transfer a bunch of data from one entry point to another, there's always big openings for human error and misrecording something. And so that's always good to limit that as much as you can. And so in addition to that, not using paper surveys, it's all through a computer interface. You have it through a web interface. You have it online, and these are very common. But yeah, there's a problem with representativeness, and people try to get around this by having very, very large sample sizes and just doing the kind of things that we talked about already with sampling from within known demographics, and doing that with Facebook and all these other big social media platforms. They know how to sort through their user base and find out specific bits of information about people given their characteristics. So this can be gotten around with big data. You're collecting tons and tons and tons of data on so many people that the net is so large that eventually you can get a sampling of the population that really is good to say, it's really accurate about predicting your behavior. And that is why with so many of these internet or these social media based companies, they're free to use, and a lot of free stuff on the internet. If it's free, then you are the product. They're buying information, they're collecting data from you and your habits, what do you like to look at, and selling it to other people, because it does say something pretty accurately about you and people, more importantly, that are like you. Lots of other people who are like you in lots of ways out there that can, their behavior can be predicted based on your behavior and how you bought something or whatever that you did on the internet. So yeah, so there's this huge field now of looking at big data and collecting that from social media sites. But one way that is still kind of a tried and true way of doing data collection is a face-to-face interview with someone that you develop a rapport with. You get a really high response rate when you do this compared to other methods. It is hard to say no to someone at your doorstep. It can happen, but I've done this hundreds of times. I did this a lot when I was in graduate school. I went around in laptops in Toledo, Ohio, and did interviews. And we had them pre-coordinated, but people would be sleeping at 10 o'clock in the morning. You have to wake them up, and it was really most everybody said yes. Very, very few people ever turned me down. So it's you're going to get a high response rate because someone's staring at you like, okay, you ready to do this? These are things that are more expensive because you have to pair people up, and you have to pay these people, and pay me, and to pay the people who are completing the survey. So there's an expense involved in that kind of thing, doing a face-to-face interview. Some other advantages, though, you have fewer don't knows, missing cases in your data. People will be it'll be harder for people just to kind of BS and not do the survey, not complete questions, if another human being has come over and given you a computer to fill the thing out. It's just one of these personal things that people are more likely to acquiesce in and fill out your survey if you're right there with them. It's not, you're not looking over their shoulder or anything like that. Like, oh, I see you. You don't do that. It's just that you're there, and so you get. It's a lot better, we know, than the kind of mail-in stuff or stuff on the internet where people just leave stuff blank. the other thing is by being there, especially with it doesn't really matter if you're with younger people or adults or older people. People will ask questions. They want to know, what do you mean by that? Can you clarify what you mean by this question? And so that way you will also help to ensure a more complete, greater completion of all your questions by all your respondents. And so that way they're there, you are there, and you can respond to any sort of questions that they may have about if something was worded weirdly and they need you to say it in a different way. Okay. Another thing that's good about having actual boots on the ground, so to speak, when you're collecting data is that you can make observations about the participants or the respondents and their dwelling places. And so, and it could range from the participant appeared to be drunk. This was one of the things that we had to comment on when I was collecting data at Bowling Green State was if the person's people seemed to be intoxicated, drunk, high, or whatever when they were answering the questionnaires. Also, just how their house looked, if it was messy, if it if it stunk of urine or something like that. If Nazi propaganda was on the walls. There was a couple places where I wasn't at these places, but this one female interviewer, she came back and was saying this guy had Nazi stuff all over his wall. So that kind of stuff is useful additional information to put in the interviewer notes, to put that stuff down, that there's this is a crazy house, or there's something really mentally off with this person, and so that is additional useful information that you can only probably get at if you were there with boots on the ground, people interviewing other people face to face. Well, this brings in problems, though, you can imagine, with having face-to-face interviews, because it all raises the issue of appearance and demeanor. And so generally speaking, you do want to match interviewee and an interviewer on demographic characteristics like race and gender. You usually want to match them up. So when I was doing interviews for Bowling Green State, usually with boys. I mean, they were white, black, Hispanic, but I was always almost all the time with boys, and a few times with girls, but it was mostly with boys. And this is important because if it's off, that is, the demographic characteristics don't match, you could bias responses. People might feel uncomfortable to respond. So there's that kind of thing that you need to take into account. Questions, if read exactly by someone who was responding to the question, that helps in response rates. You can also probe for more precision. That is, if you're getting a response from someone that's kind of vague or needs, they need more clarification. You need more clarification from them. So that's another advantage in that case, having a face-to-face interview. Another thing that you want to have in mind is a script that's prepared that describes the purpose and the nature of the survey. I mean, this kind of goes along with having informed consent, but you want to have that there ready to recite, like you're reading the Miranda rights or something that you can quickly rattle off that tells them why they're doing this. You're going to have this in a paper format somewhere for them to sign, but you want to be able to just say it. You want to be able to say, this is what we're doing with the study. This is our intentions with this. You want to have that script ready, that you can just roll that right off, and they will be able to be more confident in you and respond to your questions. And it's also a good idea sometimes to work in pairs to limit fatigue that you would experience by asking people a bunch of questions over and over again. When I collected data with a couple other people in detention centers in Toledo, Ohio, we worked together. And one of us would pass out the surveys, and some of us would do one section of the survey, and we'd switch, we'd do another section of the surveys, just so it would break up the monotony. Also, them hearing the same voice being read to for like 10 minutes straight. So you break up that. So the monotony and the fatigue is limited on both sides. The people who are answering the questions and the people who are addressing them or answering them. So that is some of the things that you want to do to try to limit some of the problems that come along with face-to-face interviews. But these are really some of the best ways to collect data from other people if you have the time and the resources, because you can get more from them by being there with them in a face-to-face interview than you can in other modes of collection. It's more costly, and it's just doesn't lend itself so well to big data. This idea of getting just tons of data from social media, that's what everybody's into right now. So okay, I think if I wanted to do anything else, I think that may be it for today, folks. So unless there was anything else that people would like to bring up, that I think is it. But yeah, that's it for today. I think if there's anything else that people want to hang around and talk about, I should have your exams back to you this week. So those will be back, and we will continue on talking about. I think what is the next chapter there? Qualitative field research. Okay, so that looks like what we're talking about next. And after that, we're going to start with our SPSS module for this course. And so this will be, I think, the last week we'll be doing things that are coming out of the practice of social research book. We'll be jumping into SPSS exercises after this. So okay, so that's it for today. Just go ahead and read that next chapter, and we will reconvene then on Thursday. So, all right, folks, take care.